Hello everyone, and welcome to another game from round 1 of the 2018 Candidates Tournament, and in my opinion this is the most interesting game that happened in round 1, and it's between the new rivals Aronian and the Liren. As you know, two of them faced off in the finals of the World Cup in Tbilisi, Georgia last year, and after drawing 4 classical games, it was only then that Aronian managed to win both of the rapid games, taking first place in the World Cup. But placing first and second, both of them qualified for the candidates, and now they are playing here. And what I want to know about this game is how much of it is exactly Aronian's home preparation and what was found over the board. And I know everyone, when you see Aronian is playing, you wonder how quickly in the opening is he gonna play h4. Well, to answer that question, we have to see the game. And I did wanna, I considered showing you some photos of the two of them actually playing, but Aegon is very strict about, you know, you can't just use any of their content, so I decided it was best not to. So sorry about that, but maybe next time. Aronian opens with c4, the English opening. We have knight to f6, knight to c3, and e6. We have e4 and now d5, e5, d4, and now e captures on f6, d captures on c3, b captures on c3, and queen captures on f6. This is all pretty standard. And here Aronian plays d4. And here you have a lot of ideas for black. You could attack the center immediately with e5, you could attack it with c5, but Liren decides to go b6. He wants to play a nice game, play bishop to b7, bring this bishop to d6, castle kingside maybe. But it's already in this position, and this is move 8. Aronian doesn't want to have anything to do with this. He plays h4, and I'm definitely sure h4 is a home preparation move, and that he really found all the poisons of the position. But as you'll see in the game, this position is so poisonous that all of his home preparation couldn't possibly help him there. The ideas, of course, are the immediate bishop to g5, attacking the queen. Rook is coming to h3. Maybe it will be an aggressive piece. Maybe it can be used as a defensive piece, as it will protect the pawn on c3, for example. So a lot of ideas here for white. But Liren isn't afraid of any of this. He simply continues. Bishop to b7. Aronian goes for bishop to g5, now attacking the queen, and queen to f5. This was played in the game. This is the only good move. Playing queen to g6 would simply give white too good of a position. As now, after bishop to d3, the queen is attacked. You don't really have anywhere to go with the queen. You either have to ruin your pawn structure with f5, or you have to play bishop to e4. But if you play bishop to e4, then h5 is coming. Queen to f5, g4, and now you have to capture the bishop. Queen captures, bishop captures, you're attacking the rook on a8, and after black defends here, queen to a4, and white has an excellent position, so Liren doesn't go for this. So after this bishop to g5 move, he plays queen to f5, and now we have bishop to d3. And again, bishop to e4 isn't an option, because then g4 is coming and h5, and we reach the same variation we just showed. So queen to a5. And what's the queen doing here? Well, now we have to really see what's going on here. I'm sure this is all still Aronian's home preparation. The queen is attacking the pawn on c3. This would come with check, so there's that, and the bishop is also eyeing the g2 pawn. So how do you prevent this? Here Aronian played king to f1. He played it relatively quickly, so I'm sure all the way to king f1, I'm sure this is still home preparation. And now you don't really want to capture this pawn on c3. If you capture queen captures on c3, then you just allow white to develop faster. Knight e2 is coming, queen has to go back, and the queen is still very inactive on a5, and white will simply continue developing. You can play something like rook b1, break open with c5, a lot of things to do here with white, and black is pretty passive. So after this king to f1 move, Liren decided to simply develop knight to c6. And here we have rook to b1. And again, rook to b1 is a very interesting idea, but you'll see why it's interesting. As here, again, you don't want to capture on c3, nothing's pretty much changing in the position, you're only going to allow white to develop faster, but capturing on a2 would be a pretty big mistake. because now after rook to a1, you have to go queen to b2, and now knight comes to e2. And now, how do you play this position with black? Let's say you want a castle. First, you have to get rid of the dark square bishop. So let's say h6, bishop goes back, and now you castle to protect your c7 pawn. But now you are losing this game, because now rook to a4 is coming. Rook to a4 being played, and now there is no defense against the bishop to c1, trapping the queen. Even if you try knight to a5 to prepare queen, so b3 is protected, it doesn't really matter. Bishop to c1, queen b3, and now bishop to c2, and the queen is trapped. So a lot of poison in this position, and I'm sure Aronian covered all of this in his home preparation. Liren plays f6. He gets rid of this extremely active bishop. Bishop to d2, and now queenside castle. And here Aronian plays a4. And now you can see this is move 14, and you're playing white. This is move 14. You have a pawn on a4, you have a pawn on h4, and you have a king on f1. So if you don't really know what you're doing, you're going to lose this game. But as you'll see, white has a lot of potential in this position. Here Liren plays e5, which is a great move as he wants to open up the center. Aronian's king is awkwardly placed on f1, so you have to punish this somehow. Here Aronian decided to play c5, and c5 is again a very tricky move as it prepares rook to b5, now pushing the queen even further to a6. So after c5, Liren decided to play bishop captures on c5. So what's the idea here? Well, if you capture the bishop, then you lose your own bishop on d3 because it's not protected. So here rook to b5 first, pushing Liren's queen even further back, queen to a6, and now rook to h3, finally making this rook lift. Now the rook is also guarding the bishop on d3. So d captures on c5 is definitely a threat. But Liren is not afraid. He plays bishop captures on d4. So what's the idea here? Well, if you capture it, c captures on d4, you get rook captures on d4. And now, what do you do here? And what's the idea? The idea is now that the rook and the queen are attacking the a4 pawn, and black actually doesn't mind giving up a piece for so many pawns. Knight to e2, attacking the rook, and now queen captures on a4. Queen captures, rook captures, and here Liren would have 4 pawns for the piece, and out of those 4, 3 are connected past pawns, so black would be better in this position. So a lot of poison to it. So after this bishop captures on d4, first Aronian plays bishop to e2. Now Liren really has to find a move, and here in this position he played rook to d6. I caught a glimpse of the live coverage by Jan Gustafsson and Sopiko Gurumishvili, where Jan said that he cheated. He looked at an engine's proposal, and the engine suggested bishop to a8. And it's true, when you consider a move like bishop to a8, it all makes sense. Now after Aronian continues, rook b2, you play queen to b7, and now you have this beautiful queen-bishop battery eyeing that g2 pawn. So now if you play pawn captures, you get knight captures, and it's really questionable, does white have the advantage for his extra piece here, because that extra piece really isn't doing anything, and black is really active. But okay, it's hard to say if Liren saw bishop to a8 or he just didn't like it. He decided to play rook to d6. And here Aronian played rook to b1, and this was the position. This is the position you really have to put on your board, or you can use it as a diagram on your screen and really study it, because it's extremely complicated and there are a lot of things that can happen here. Here, basically, what they did was, like I said, rook to b1. Now there's an open discovery on Liren's queen. Queen to a5 was played, and here Aronian repeated rook to b5, queen a6, rook to b1, and queen a5, and rook to b5. And it was in this position that both of them agreed to a draw. But why is this such a great position to study? Because after this rook to d6 move by Liren, okay, Aronian did play rook to b1, but the thing you have to see that after this rook to b1, the queen is attacked, but instead of rook to b1, can Aronian capture this bishop on d4? Well, not really. If you capture the bishop, then you don't really gain anything. Black can simply play knight captures on d4, and again your rook is now attacked on b5. You have to take care of this, and after rook to b2, then knight can capture on e2. So black pretty much solved all of his problems. Another thing is rook to b1 isn't the best move Aronian could play. Best move here would actually be rook to b2, because after the following variation, queen now has to move queen to a5. And now after c captures on d4, your queen is attacked. Seems like a good move for white, but now black has queen to d5. And now whatever you do, black is either threatening to capture on d4, or if you capture with the pawn on e5, knight captures. Now you again have the bishop queen battery eyeing g2, but now at least your bishop on d2 is not attacked, as I mean it is, but the rook on b2 is defending it. That's why rook to b2 would have been better than rook to b1, but it seems that this part of the game wasn't in Aronian's home preparation. But again, after you defend this with knight f3, the rook is coming to d8. I mean, it's very hard to say can white really make use of his extra piece in a position like this. But that's not the end of it. After this rook to b1 move, we said queen to a5 was played. Aronian repeated rook to b5, and here again queen to a6 was played. But there was also a possibility for Ding Liren to bravely go where no man has gone before, but he had to play bishop captures on c3. But I'm sure both Aronian and Ding Liren were extremely happy that he didn't play this, as this position is simply too complicated. Now if you capture black's queen, then you're losing the game after rook captures on d2. If you try to save the queen, then bishop captures on a5, and with two rooks, two powerful bishops here, and the knight, black has more than enough compensation for the queen. Black is better here. On the other hand, after bishop captures on c3, the move you really had to find with white is rook to d3. Now, the bishop on d2 is no longer attacked 3 times, but now rook captures, bishop captures, and this is the move Ding Liren had to see if he was even to consider playing bishop captures on c3. Bishop to a6. And now this is again extremely complicated. If you play rook captures on a5, then bishop captures on d3 comes with check. If you block knight e2, then you get knight to d4, attacking the pinned piece. So king to e1, but now bishop captures, queen captures, and now again one more move Ding Liren had to see before he even considered entering this variation is rook to d8. And now you're protecting your bishop, and this rook has nowhere to go. The bishop is covering a6, the rook is now covering d5, the bishop is also covering b5, so white is also now losing this rook. Better to grab something than nothing, and after knight captures, a5 probably, and black would have a bishop and a rook for the queen, but with a lot of pawns up, not a lot, but with a pawn up, it would definitely be a better position for black. So yeah, I mean, such an extremely complicated game, and here, after this rook to d6 move, definitely a position for you to really enjoy and try to figure out all the variations, as you can probably stare at this for like an hour and still don't figure out what's going on the board. So definitely the most beautiful game and the most complicated game, as you can see that even with a lot of home preparation, you still can't be ready for anything that happens on the board. So yeah, that's the game, Aronian versus Ding Liren. I do hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, probably with Tal versus Botvinnik Game 6. Thank you all, and see you soon.